When Ava walked out of our apartment wearing my anger like a badge and that arrogant half-smile plastered on her face, she thought she'd won. She'd rehearsed the look, the cool indifference, the breathless retelling of how it just happened, the smug certainty that I'd crawl back. She underestimated three things: my patience, my pride, and the quiet horror of realizing the woman you loved could betray you without blinking. At first I did what I thought a reasonable man should do. I swallowed the tremor in my voice, packed my things into a duffel, and left the apartment that once felt like a future. I didn't shout. I didn't sabotage anything. I felt tiny and hollow, but my limbs moved with the mechanical calm of someone who knows panic is a poor ally. The thing about being cheated on is that it rewires you. Suspicion becomes a microscope, and you start seeing how much of your life was shared with a stranger. She didn't call that night. She sent a single text the next morning: "You're overreacting." It was a mistake. Don't make it a thing. The gall of it made me laugh, sharp and humorless. A mistake was the line of every unrepentant person who'd been caught. I could have been a dramatic cliché, screamed and smashed plates on the kitchen floor. Instead, I opened a new document and began to type. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. I say it's a dossier best served meticulously assembled. I spent the next 2 weeks collecting the small, tidy proofs of what she'd been doing, receipts that contradicted her late nights at the office, screenshots of messages that used language she swore she never used, social media posts that she thought were private. I didn't do anything illegal, no hacks, no stolen keys, just what anyone with a healthy dose of curiosity and a phone could find if they looked hard enough. But proof alone is impotent without timing and theater. Ava was a creature of image. She curated her life like an art director: charity brunches, fitness studio selfies, lunch meetings with colleagues. She thrived on the illusion that she'd mastered both domesticity and desire, that she could keep a husband at home while sneaking thrills behind the scenes. To undo that, I needed to show her the one place where her image mattered most: the very people who praised it. First, I started small and surgical. I called a few mutual friends, not the kind to take sides, but the kind who liked truth more than drama. I told them plainly, "I have something you should know." I didn't fill in details on the phone. People are compulsive. If you volunteer the right hint, they'll lean in and demand to see. I emailed copies of receipts to one friend who ran events for Ava's social circle, attaching the names of people she'd claimed to be with during those times. The emails landed like carefully placed seeds. Then I played the long game. I contacted Ava's boss, an earnest man who prided himself on his company's morals and public image. I framed my message the way a fundraiser frames a campaign: neutral, factual, offering him the chance to verify something that could affect his firm's reputation. I attached a few innocuous screenshots and signed off with, "I believe you deserve to know." He wrote back within an hour, concerned and clinical. He asked for more. He was the kind of person who needed evidence, and I fed him exactly what he asked for. Meanwhile, I perfected my public face. I didn't scream on social media. I didn't stage confrontations. I acted hurt, quiet, dignified, the kind of wounded that makes others uncomfortable enough that they ask questions. At a mutual friend's dinner, I let Ava flit from conversation to conversation while I sat and listened. I smiled politely when someone praised her commitment to balancing work and family. I nodded. I let the compliments hollow out like a drum until the right knife slid in. When the email to her boss arrived, with the receipts and timestamps connected like a neat narrative, the dominoes began to fall. He called her into his office under the pretense of discussing an important client. I watched from the thoughtful remove of a friend who was still in the room and saw her leave the meeting with skin gone pale and an expression that matched the first time she'd ever been genuinely surprised by consequence. The next morning, her name was absent from the company's internal newsletter. A rumor that began as an HR whisper spread like a smudge across the sheen she'd worked so hard to polish. But it wasn't enough to ruin her career. That felt petty. The real wound I wanted to inflict was to the thing she treasured most after her image: control. Ava loved control, over plans, over perceptions, over how people measured her. So I took that away gently, deliberately. I reached out to Daniel, the man she'd treated as an inconvenient thrill. I didn't threaten him, I didn't yell. I simply asked him to meet, in a public park, under the thin, honest sunlight of a weekday afternoon. I told him I had questions about what he thought he knew. He came, smug and confident at first, but his smirk faded when I slid a folder across the bench. Inside were the receipts, the photos, the timeline, not accusatory, just clear. Daniel swallowed. You wanted her, I said. She wanted both. How does that feel? He had no answer, men like him usually don't. Word reached Ava's social circle that something was off. Invitations stopped coming. Phone calls went unanswered. People didn't have to know every sordid detail, suspicion alone is corrosive. The careful social architecture she'd built, lunches, weekend brunches, sponsored posts, began to look like scaffolding around a hollow set. Her charity work? An obligation she hadn't really engaged in. Her close friends? Suddenly distant in a way that said they'd chosen to protect their reputations rather than pick a side. The final act wasn't a public shaming or a viral post. That's not who I am, and it wouldn't have been satisfying. It was a quiet Wednesday evening, the kind of ordinary night that makes truth feel domestic and irreversible. She came home from work, the same practiced smile practiced in a dozen mirrors. I was waiting in the living room, the lights dimmed, a bottle of wine open on the coffee table. She stepped inside and stopped. Is everything okay? She asked. I handed her a small envelope. Inside were two things, the signed divorce papers I had filed quietly weeks earlier, and a single photocopy of a receipt with a timestamp that matched one of her office late nights. No flourish, no accusation. Just the facts and the empty paper that meant our legal ending. She tried to laugh it off, to say we could work on it, to call it a misunderstanding. I felt no urge to argue. I'd already watched her lose what she most prized. Yes, her job had been embarrassed. Yes, mutual friends had pulled back, but more devastating for her was the slipping of control. People she'd curated now had context, and context changes everything. You look smug, she said finally, her voice small and thin. I almost smiled, then I remembered why I'd left in the first place. Smugness had been a defense for both of us. I'd used it as armor only when necessary. I don't want to make you suffer, I said. I just wanted you to have the consequence you never thought would arrive. You wanted freedom to live as you pleased. Freedom has a cost. She looked at the papers and at me and, in the end, what she felt wasn't shame so much as baffled hurt. She had been so good at convincing herself she was untouchable that the idea she'd lose what she'd built was unimaginable. To me, watching her confusion was not triumph so much as closure. I had gained something more valuable than revenge, peace that didn't have to be loud. Months later, I found solace in small things, a long run on a Sunday morning, a book read in a corner cafe, friends who asked the hard questions and didn't need me to perform grief. Ava's life, for all its outward shine, had become quieter, less certain. She learned what many people learn only after losing what they assumed they could always keep, that choices have consequences, and smirks are fragile. I didn't relish her discomfort. I merely ensured truth had its day. And sometimes that is enough.